Hello, we are Jason, and
And I'm Joel.
for the final project of time series class, and we want to forecast domestic stock market using foreign country stock indices. We assume that the domestic stock index is highly correlated with foreign country stock indices due to the global corporate governance. Here we want to focus on the KOSPI index from South Korea and NASDAQ index from the United States. South Korea and United States have been deep ties after World War II in the aspect of democracy, economics, and defense for near 80 years. Now we want to see how they cooperate in business using representative stock market indices for the KOSPI and the NASDAQ. Here we want to introduce trading terms for security. It is called company's asset stocks. And also NASDAQ is a representative stock market indices from United States. And also KOSPI is similar with United States NASDAQ. And also we have few countries stock market indices data on the right side. So we want to introduce our project online. We want to do data exploration on the first stage. And we want to apply a univariate model and multivariate model, and also neural net and ensemble model.
Now, when it comes to the data that we chose, we turned to Kaggle for stock market data. This is actually a really well-written data set by Mukhtar Ahmad, who wrote a data set on 33 worldwide stock market indices dating all the way back to 1997. This stock market data contains not only the dates of values from the stock market, but also the day's highs, lows, the opening values, the closing values, the volume traded on that day, and the adjusted close. And this is for 33 countries around the world. So this is a big data set with a lot of information in it. Now, when we look at the data set itself, though, it unfortunately has a lot of missing values. You can see that some values have entire columns that are missing. This unfortunately means that those columns we cannot use for our analysis. So we had to get a little bit selective with how we looked at this data set. First of all, we decided that any column or attribute with over 12% of its NA values recorded, or 12% of its values being NA, we decided to eliminate those columns. After that, we decided to use rolling averages with a K of 3 to impute values for the remaining NA values. This is better than finding one overall average for each attribute, as the average, as we will see, seems to change over time, or the general value of a stock changes over time. So using one long overarching average just doesn't fit the data set well. The remaining NA values that are sometimes generated from rolling mean imputation, these were simply ignored or omitted when we actually ran our analysis. So once we had our data set cleaned up, we turned to variable selection. Now, for our study, we specifically wanted to look at the US NASDAQ, represented by IXIC, and the South Korean KOSPI, represented by KS11. So once we took the values that each of these stock markets had recorded within the data set, we looked to see how they were correlated with each other to identify any potential multicollinearity. This is important because this allows us to eliminate some variables that we might not need, but also improves the reliability of our predictions. What we found is that most of the values were highly correlated with each other, except for volume, which seemed to have kind of an abstract trend associated with it in either case. So what we did is we decided to look specifically at the opening values for the KOSPI and for the NASDAQ, and then we also looked at the volumes for the KOSPI and the NASDAQ. Now, when we actually look at the data sets itself and we look at the opening values of the KOSPI or the NASDAQ, we see that in both cases we have wandering or potentially wandering non-stationary behavior. So we see that over time there is no clear trend within the realization. We see that within autocorrelation factors that each value is highly correlated with the value preceding it, and this correlation does not decrease over time. We see this in both KS11 and ICSIC. And then we also see from the frequency plots that there is a large peak at 0 hertz, and this is indicative of non-stationary behavior. This is something that's very common, and this can make it difficult for predictive models in time series to actually predict future values. So we have to be very selective with the models that we come up with. Now, when we look at the volume associated with each stock market, we see something similar. We see that there is an overarching increase over time. We see that autocorrelation does not decrease with time. And we again see that frequency at 0 hertz. So in both cases, this kind of suggests that, again, volume is also non-stationary. So we have to be very careful with the models that we generate.
Now, I want to introduce our univariate model. Start with ARMA 6.4 model. And we did a young box test after visual inspection and suggest some signal is not captured by the model. And due to the limitation of the ARMA model, and like you see in the figure, the red line forecasts like almost straight line after the end of the data you want to forecast. And also the long-term square root ASE is 1581, and also short-term square root ASE is lower than long-term, like 225. And I want to go over our next model is ARIMA 115 model. So what we want to do is we want to factor out the trending, like, and using close to unicircle roots, and it was failed to reject Dickey Fuller test with p-value higher than 0.05, and ARIMA 115 model selected after differencing data for standard stationarization using BIC the metric. So we did a long-term square root ASE 1630, and also short-term square root ASE was 266. So our final univariate model is ARIMA 6.4 model, which has 6 coefficients of AR part and also 4 coefficients of MA part. And we want to present the equation of the model and also some factor table.
Our first VAR model sought to look at volume and opening data for the KOSPI and the NASDAQ indexes. Now, when we ran multivariate VAR using volume and opening data, we found that the short-term square-rooted ASEs were indeed larger than what we got from our univariate models in both short-term of 30 days and long-term of 365 days. It was a significant jump in ASE or square-rooted ASE value. But what we did notice is that the predicted values seemed to capture the downward trend associated with the end of our data set. Now, this suggests that our VAR model was actually able to some extent, predict the downward trend that we saw at the tail end of our data set. This was promising for us, as this said or suggested to us that while we could not capture a more accurate predicted value with the VAR model, we could potentially predict or anticipate future trends within the data. So after we looked at opening and volume, we decided to look at simply the opening values. And we found that when we looked at VAR models with just opening data, there was no difference in performance. Predicted output was exactly the same, and we still got our downward trend. Now, given that we want to use the simplest possible model, we decided to move forward strictly with the multivariate VAR model, looking only at opening data. After we ran our VAR model, we next turned to neural networks. Now, here we had to get a little bit selective with how we ran these. When we tried to use any neural networks beyond just looking at opening data, we ended up getting models that would crash. or they would end up taking so long to process that we could never actually see their results. So for the time being, we only looked at a neural network looking at the NASDAQ opening data. Now, when we did this, we saw that the ASE was significantly larger than either the VAR model or the univariate model. Same with the long term. Now, this suggests that on its own, the opening data is not enough to create a robust neural network. That said, in the future, if we were to ever try with either a stronger neural network looking at larger spans of time or with additional attributes to create a more detailed network itself, we might be able to get better performance. Now, after we ran our neural network, we next moved on to ensembling. This is a technique that is traditionally used when you have several weak models and you hope to use them together in the hopes that they can produce a more robust prediction. For our purposes, we looked strictly at our two best performing models, the ARMA and the VAR, and we decided to use mean ensembling to get our ensemble predictions. There are other forms of ensembling, like stacked ensembling or median ensembling, but we did not look at those here. With the mean ensemble performance, we found that after bootstrapping the predicted values and comparing those to the actual, the average square-rooted ASE for a 30-day period was about 366.5657, essentially saying that over a 30-day window, each prediction is off by about $366. Now, there is also a confidence interval associated with this, but these do suggest that the model is performing better than the VAR, but not the ARMA. So this suggests that perhaps in the future, if we can produce more robust models, perhaps we can produce better mean ensemble predictions.
Now we want to introduce our model performance comparison using univariate ARMA and VAR and ensemble model. The root ASA value, the lowest one is ARMA and the highest one is VAR, and the ensemble is on the middle. And we present the confidence interval for each model using upper and lower values. And also the long-term performance comparison is higher than short-term performance, like as expected. But the takeaway from this table is that the ensemble model doesn't give like outstanding results in the aspect of ASE metric, and it's like a middle between ARMA and also VAR model. And again, the smallest ASE value was ARMA model, and the highest one is VAR model.
Now, in conclusion, we found limited success with our attempts to predict NASDAQ values using KOSPI index. However, some of these limitations might be due to the processing power that we were not able to access. With the R programs that we had available to us, we had a very limited amount of CPU and memory available to us. We also did not have a very robust data set available. We had quite a few opening, close, adjusted close, very price-specific data for the NASDAQ and for KOSPI, as well as volume data, but we don't have any additional data that could be also playing a factor in NASDAQ prices. Now, in conclusion of what we did from our models, we do see that there is evidence that predictive models are capable of not only tracking, but predicting ICSIC values, at least with the opening values. Now, we saw this with our VAR and our neural networks, where they were able to capture that downward trend or anticipate that downward trend that we saw at the end of our data set. Now, these are promising results, as at the very least in the short term, investors might be able to use these models or eventually more robust ensemble models to predict indexes or KOSPI indexes or NASDAQ indexes, as well as changes in market trends. Maybe something like a downward NASDAQ value might be something we can anticipate with more robust models.
Yes, in the future projects, like Joel said, previous conclusion, we want to do bolster processing power. For example, using HPC, parallel computing resources from SMU, and also we want to use alternative packages like Professor Nikos Kourenches at University of Skövde. He said his team is developing in the PyTorch resources for neural net packages for time series analysis, so we can apply that packages on it. And also, please search TSWGE in Kaggle, and there is additional analysis and time series forecasting using VAR model, and also TSWG packages for like other countries like Korea and United States and UK and Brazil and Israel. So please contact Joel and Jason if you have additional questions using this link and see the Kaggle pages. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.